All right, so we are back and we are going to continue modeling our little cartoon tombstone piece. So last video we left off using the spin tool to make sort of the beginning of a flower. So let's continue this piece up. All right, so we need a piece that's going to sort of cover this area where it is overlapping, and it's going to need to eventually come down into sort of a cylindrical stem. So let's actually start with the stem. Let's add a new cylinder, scale it except for Z. And so we need to have it sort of flare out at the top here, but have more of a curved, tapered appearance. So let's just start adding some loop tools in, and we can disable our proportional editing. Let's start scaling this more appropriately to match the stem. And let's just continue beveling, scaling, adding edge loops until we get a more organic looking shape. And then we can also give this a little bend to make it look less rigid. Let's turn on proportional editing, and we may need a lot more vertices for this, but yeah, we do need a few more edge loops. So let's make this roughly as evenly divided as we can. Let's grab one of these loops and just give this a little bit of bend. And we can even rotate this ever so slightly so it just looks like the weight of the flower is like just starting to tip it over this way. Okay. So we need some, I forget the exact biological name, but they're these little leaf type structures that form the bud before the flower opens, and they are still present on the flower after it does. And it's also going to serve the purpose of hiding this overlap for us. So let's just start from a new plane. And I'm in top orthographic mode. Just going to start moving these things around. I'm bringing this edge up to the origin. I'm going to bring these edges way, way in. And we're going to cut a loop. And we're going to bring these edges in and turn off proportional editing, bring them back. So we're making roughly the same shape as we did with our petal, but we're going to make it a little bit different. I'm going to make sort of the wider part down here and the more narrow part down here, or up here, I should say. And from there, it's more or less the same process of smoothing something out, giving it more detail, more vertices, which will allow you to make it look smoother, more organic. I'm narrating my steps less. I feel by now things that I'm not describing should be review. If they are not, I would go back and rewatch the previous videos. Okay, so now we need to give it some kind of volume here. Let's enable proportional mode again. Hit G and then Z, and let's adjust our scroll wheel. Give it sort of this indented area. Let's grab this one on the Z and move it up. Okay, so now I need to move it into place because now we're getting into, you know, sort of how does it need to come around these things. So let's put it in place first before we edit the shape of it anymore. And get it sized appropriately as well. And then I believe it's going to look best if we position these so that these leaf structures are in between the petals. I don't know if that's biologically accurate, but I think it's going to look the best, which is what really matters for this. Okay, so now it's going to be a little bit more trial and error trying to get the spin duplicates to work. So let's go ahead and spin these duplicates. Now I've accidentally clicked my 3D cursor over here, so it's not going to, if it's going to spin it around the 3D cursor. So just before we actually do it, let's reset this by pressing Shift and C. Okay, now let's try spinning these duplicates. I'll look at it in wire mode so I can see through these petals. Let's spin these around and make sure we click Use Duplicates here. Okay, so I think that's pretty good. There's some overlap here, which I think we can fix if we pull this portion out so it's more forming more of a cup. Let's try it again. Yeah, that looks a lot better. You can still see this a little bit, so let's bring it down even? No. Let's just bring it in. It's really not at the scale that it's going to be, at the angle we're going to be viewing it. I don't think it's going to be an issue, but you know, you can add more. You can adjust this as needed. You could even bring in sort of just this bottom loop, disable proportional editing, and you could scale it in so it doesn't do that as much. Okay. I might want to do like a leaf here. Maybe we'll just see how it looks without it. So I'm happy with how this looks. I want to join this all into a single object. So let's do that. Let's select everything and make sure wherever we want our pivot to be, whichever object we want to maintain the pivot for is selected last. Hit Control and J. Let's rename that object. Okay, so obviously the scale is way off for this, but that's fine. As long as the proportions are fine, we can just scale it as needed. Oops. And now, actually, let's just bring this all back to the center. And while we're at it, it's always nice to put your pivot points in such a way that you don't have to make a bunch of adjustments if you clear the location. So if I clear the location of this object now, I put it over here, if I pressed Alt-G now at the pivot point there, it would just snap to where it's supposed to be. It's always a nice feature to do. You can see we're going like very cartoony with this one, very stylized, because we just have these flowers popping out. That is looking pretty good. But let's see if we can add even more to this. Start with the cylinder. I just still had that manipulator up because I was still active in the spin tool, so I just went up here to the select box and re-enabled that, so I have my normal selection tools back again. What I'm trying to make here is like a hand, like a big cartoon zombie hand sticking out of the ground. I don't know quite how I want to build it just yet, so I'm sort of being a little bit loose and experimental to get the shape that I want, and then I'll worry kind of more about how I want to build it. So yeah, I'm just gonna build the shape of it in primitives first, because I'm not exactly sure how I want it to be posed. So this is a lot faster to just build it in primitives than it is to try to model it and then decide, oh, I need to change the pose of it. But you know, now it's suddenly a lot more work to do that. Resetting my pivot. So now if I am in right orthographic trying to pose this finger joint, I can, you know, do it much more easily from there. Actually, what I should do is set it to this object. So let's snap that. And so now I can rotate completely around the joint. And we can scale this if we need to. So now if I have all of these selected and I have active element in my transform pivot point options, as long as the last thing I have selected is the one I want to use the pivot for, I can pivot, you know, transform this whole thing. Oh, let's go. You're just pressing G twice on the keyboard to slide these edges in. You can also press G and Z to get the same effect on these particular objects. Okay, so let's just scale this down a little bit more. Again, we're going for a sort of stylized look, so it's okay if the proportions are not totally accurate, as long as they fit the style that you're going for. Okay, I'm going to just join this by pressing Ctrl and J, and this I'm going to use as sort of a reference object for how I'm going to build my actual piece. So I'm going to build it off of a new object entirely. And let's build it from a cube. So similar in the way in which we were working with reference images, I'm basically just built myself a reference in 3D because in my case it's going to be faster than trying to draw something. So, but we're going to use the same techniques basically. So let's come into this object, this reference object we just made. And under the properties panel, let's go to object properties. And down here where it says viewport display, let's just open this up. Now, this just gives you some preview settings for your objects. You can draw a wireframe over them that you can see at all times and things like that. But I'm going to come down here to where it says display as. I'm going to change it from texture to wire. And that will display just this object in wireframe mode, so I can still use it as a reference while modeling this object. Okay, so now we're in right orthographic. Just going to come down here and same way, just start lining up the major points. But instead of now making this hand, this palm, and these fingers all separate objects, I'm just going to extrude from here until I get the shape that I want. And again, I'm not worried so much about topology or edge loops or things like that because I have no plans to animate this. Okay, so this is honestly all we have to do to get the basic form of our hand. Yeah, so let's add some loops so we can make extrusions. So we're gonna add them. We're gonna add 3 cuts, which will leave 1, 2, 3, 4 faces to extrude out from here from. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm just gonna select the face for the index finger. And I'm gonna drop this line basically right in the center of this joint. And then I didn't do this with the reference model because I felt that I had enough information to go off of, but there is one more finger joint we're gonna add to each of these fingers. And we will probably need to Add some more geometry as we go. That's okay. Right, now repeat the process down for each of these. I want to keep the poly count on these as low as I can right now. I'm really only dropping in cuts where there would be joints because it allows me just the maximum amount of flexibility for reposing this. So if I just extruded that out and decided that hand was starting to look a little too relaxed for the pose I actually wanted, I need to move some of these joints and these things and these what would be bones essentially. I need to repose them. So okay, and just continuing on. Moving through this quite quickly, not spending as much time on narration. All of this should be review. Let's just hide this really quickly and see how this goes coming along. Pretty good, actually. So let's just finish this out with the thumb. Let's add a loop cut right here so we can extrude out from this face. And actually, we might want to extrude out from both of these. Flatten that with scale X0. Let's bring this out. I think the reference is a little bit off, so I'm going to drop this cut in right here for that joint. And we're definitely going to need another cut here, otherwise it's going to get weird. Select that one again. And yeah, I think I want it to go something like this. Actually, that's okay. So I've just slid one edge over another one because I decided I did not actually want another cut there. So to get rid of the duplicates, remember all we have to do is select the entire area we want Blender to evaluate. Press M on our keyboard and hit by distance, and it's removed all 6 duplicate vertices. Okay, let's see how this looks with a subdivision surface modifier. Oops, what did I put that on? Put that on the wrong object. We can also, if you still have this text object, we don't really need it anymore. You can just delete it. Okay, all right. Not bad. Could be better. Let's fix this. So sometimes when you have cylindrical or like tube-shaped objects, you'll get this sort of extreme inward tapering. So to fix that, we just need to add, I mean, you could scale it, but you could also fix it by just adding an edge loop there. We'll just, because it's being subdivided here again, it will kind of retain more of the original shape. So let's add some cuts right here. And then if you feel like you're losing definition in these sharp angles, again, this can be solved by adding cuts close to each other. So I could either add edge loops on the top and the bottom, or you could bevel this edge. Either way will get you a pretty good result. And I do want these fingers to be somewhat blocky and square. It's just the style that I'm going for in this piece, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time rounding them out. So I'm spending a lot of time trying to make these fingers the right width. But really we could be speeding this up by selecting the finger, coming into shrink fatten, and doing it this way. Okay, so I have everything selected and just pulling out the manipulator. So now it is just a matter of coming in here, refining the shape, adding more detail, refining the shape. This arm, because it ends right here, is starting to taper in, so we don't want that because we want it to look like it's going through the dirt and isn't attached to a whole zombie type person, so we can just add an edge loop and slide it down to maintain more of that shape. So it's looking pretty good. There's a little bit of stretching right here that is being caused by this edge. So if we had this edge continue down this way, I don't think that that would be as much of an issue. It will kind of throw off our edge loops, but we're almost done with this piece, so I think it's going to be safe. So let's dissolve this edge. And so we just have this very warped face right here. But let's fix this by joining these 2 points. And now joining these 2 points. Oh, interesting. Let's subdivide this. Just got an error there. We could not figure out how to join those two, so I'm just going to tell them exactly how I want those two to be joined. And I want to put one right here, J to join. And that's fixed a little bit of the stretching. There's still some, and we could spend a lot more time refining this shape, adding more loops, refining it even further. But I think you get the idea. And that is going to wrap up this demonstration for the advanced mesh editing tools. In the next section, we are going to get into sculpting. So I will see you then.